It started on a Wednesday afternoon. The kind of day where Chicago's sky hangs heavy with gray, the wind not just cold, but judgmental. The streets downtown were busy. Tourists walked like they had nowhere to be. Locals walked like they had somewhere to be 10 minutes ago. And tucked between a towering hotel and a forgotten bookstore was a quiet, upscale restaurant, Marion's Table. No signs, no music, just a silver handle and a reservation list longer than a church confession line. Jonathan Roumie, dressed in jeans, a navy peacoat, and the kind of humility that made people double-take, walked in alone. He wasn't there for the attention. He never is. He just wanted lunch, maybe peace, maybe something else he couldn't name. The host looked up, eyes flickering with slow recognition. That pause, that heartbeat of asterisk, is that who I think it is? You could almost hear it. Jonathan smiled. Hi, table for one, under Roumie. The host blinked, nodded. Yes, of course, right this way, Mr. Roumie. A couple glanced over. A waitress stopped mid-step. He could feel it, that quiet ripple of energy he never got used to. Not fame, not even recognition, more like expectation, the kind people carry when they think they already know your story. He sat near the window. The corner table, the kind of spot where you can see everyone, but still feel alone. He liked it that way. The waitress came over, young, nervous, kind eyes. Would you like something to drink to start? Jonathan smiled. Water's perfect, thank you. She nodded quickly and hurried off like she needed a moment to process who she just spoke to. A couple minutes passed, then 5, then 10, no water, no menu, and something shifted. The atmosphere thickened, the kind of silence that doesn't come from quiet, but from watching. He noticed the glances, the hushed whispers. A man in a suit near the bar made a phone call without breaking eye contact. Jonathan turned slightly, trying not to feel it. That thing, that weight, the invisible judgment that follows you even when your hands are clean. The waitress came back, slower this time. No water. She didn't meet his eyes. Mr. Roumie, the manager would like to speak with you. His brow furrowed, not angry, just confused. Sure, he said softly. Out came a man in his late 50s. Sharp suit, shaved head, the kind of walk that says I don't have time for nonsense. His name tag read, Vincent, general manager. He didn't sit, didn't smile, didn't offer a hand. Mr. Roumie, he said flatly. I'm going to have to ask you to leave. Jonathan stared at him, stunned. Sorry, what? Vincent's voice stayed low, controlled. You're causing a disturbance. Jonathan blinked. I've been sitting here quietly. I haven't said a word. The manager didn't flinch. People are uncomfortable. We try to create a safe space here. Jonathan's jaw tensed. I'm just here for lunch. I made a reservation. Vincent leaned in slightly. I know who you are. And I know the kind of attention you bring. Religious controversy, politics, press. We're not interested in being a headline tomorrow. Jonathan took a slow breath. The way someone does when they know anger won't help. But also, when something sacred in them starts to hurt. I don't bring cameras. I don't bring controversy. I'm just a man trying to eat. A beat passed. Vincent's eyes narrowed. With respect, your presence is making people uneasy. I'm going to have to ask you to go. A silence fell over the restaurant. People were listening now, pretending not to, but watching. Jonathan stood, not quickly, not defiantly, but with the quiet dignity of a man who's been misunderstood before. He reached into his coat pocket, pulled out a $20 bill, and set it on the table he never got to eat at. For the waitress, he said. Not your fault. Then he turned to walk out. But a voice behind him stopped everything. Wait, are you seriously kicking him out? A young man, maybe late 20s, sitting with a group of friends near the center of the room. The manager stiffened. Sir, this doesn't concern you. The man stood. Yeah, it kinda does. He didn't do anything wrong. He's literally sitting here, quietly, alone. More murmurs, more shifting. Jonathan froze. He didn't want this. Not again. Not the attention. Not the debate. But it was already unfolding. A woman at the bar added, I thought this place was about respect. This feels more like discrimination. Vincent's voice rose slightly. We have a right to refuse service. He's a polarizing figure. A chuckle came from the other side of the room. Someone said, you mean because he plays Jesus? Another voice, you mean because he talks about Jesus? The energy turned, slowly, subtly, but real. People were standing now, not everyone, but enough. Enough to make Vincent feel the tide shift. Jonathan raised a hand gently. Please, I'm not here to cause a scene. But it was too late. The moment had taken shape. One woman walked over and stood beside him. You don't have to leave alone. A man followed. I'll walk out with you. Then another. And another. Like something old and powerful was waking up. Like maybe, just maybe, people were tired of fear winning. Jonathan looked around. His eyes shimmered, but he didn't cry. He just nodded, slowly, gratefully, and walked out, not alone, but followed by 12 people who left their meals, their comfort, and their silence behind. Outside, the cold felt different. Not softer, but clearer. He exhaled and looked up at the sky. And then, something strange happened. A young woman, maybe college age, was standing by the curb. She had tears in her eyes. And a small notebook in her hand. I didn't know if I'd see you, she whispered. Jonathan smiled gently. You were in there. She shook her head. No, I was across the street. But, I've been praying. About something. For weeks. And I wrote in here, if I saw you, I'd know God heard me. He didn't speak right away. Just reached out, touched the notebook lightly. And said, he hears you, always has. That's when she broke. The tears came fast. She hugged him. And Jonathan, tired, shaken, but still somehow whole, hugged her back. Longer than a moment, long enough for something to shift. And when she pulled away, she said, thank you for getting kicked out today. He laughed softly. I didn't plan on it. I think, God did. And maybe she was right. Because what started as humiliation inside a restaurant was about to become something much bigger and much harder to ignore. It didn't take long for the story to spread. By that evening, someone had posted a grainy cell phone video on TikTok. Just 27 seconds. No edits. No background music. Just the moment Jonathan Roumie stood up, the manager pointing toward the door, and a young man in the middle of the restaurant saying, are you seriously kicking him out? It went viral in under 4 hours. Comments poured in. That's Jonathan Roumie. That's the guy from The Chosen. Why would they kick him out? This makes me sick. We live in a world where it's controversial just to believe in something. I've eaten at Marian's table. Not anymore. Within 12 hours, the restaurant's Yelp page was flooded. 1-star reviews, screenshots, calls for boycotts, hashtags started trending, hashtag stand with Jonathan, hashtag faith is not offensive, hashtag Marian's mess. But Jonathan, he stayed silent. No tweets, no statements, no interviews. He went home, turned off his phone, sat on the floor of his apartment in silence. Not in anger, in grief, because he knew how these things went. He'd seen it before. Moments like this didn't just go viral, they became weapons. And sometimes, the people holding the swords were the very people who claimed to follow the same Jesus he tried to represent. There was a knock at the door. It was his friend, David. A fellow actor, less famous, but wise in a way that didn't scream for attention. You okay? David asked, stepping inside. Jonathan didn't answer right away. Just shook his head. Why does it hurt? He finally said. I wasn't surprised, but it still hurt. David sat beside him on the floor. Because you still expect people to be better. Jonathan let out a bitter laugh. Guess that's my problem. David nodded. Nah, that's your strength. The silence between them was filled with the kind of friendship that doesn't need noise. Until Jonathan finally whispered, I didn't do anything wrong, Dave. I know, but now I'm the face of something again. Some war one didn't sign up for. They'll make this about politics. Religion. The culture war. David looked at him. And what if it's about something else entirely? Jonathan turned. What if it's not about you? David said. What if it's about us? Jonathan blinked. Us. David nodded. Us. People who still believe kindness matters. People who think faith shouldn't make you a target. Jonathan leaned back against the wall. It just feels so broken. And it was. Because while the internet flamed with outrage, the real fire was burning somewhere else entirely. Back at Marian's table, the manager, Vincent, was in damage control mode. Emails, phone calls, legal consultations. The owner, a woman named Claudia, flew in from New York. She wasn't happy. This isn't a good look, Vincent. Vincent tightened his tie. He was a liability, a public figure. We don't allow politics in the dining room. Claudia narrowed her eyes. Playing Jesus isn't politics. He makes statements online. He talks about his faith like it's fact. People feel alienated. Claudia walked to the window, staring out at the street below. You know what alienates people more than faith, Vincent? He didn't answer. Fear, she said. Back in Jonathan's apartment, the silence was broken by a new sound. His phone buzzed. Over and over. Missed calls. Messages. Requests for interviews. Statements. He ignored them. But one message stopped him. It was from a woman named Lydia Sanchez. She wasn't a celebrity. Not a journalist. She was a waitress. The same one from the restaurant. She wrote, "Hi Jonathan, I don't expect you to read this. But I just wanted to say thank you. For your grace. For not yelling. For seeing me when no one else did. I quit this morning. I couldn't work somewhere that treats people like that. I don't have another job lined up, but I'll figure it out. Just thought you should know, you changed something. Even if it hurt." Jonathan stared at the message. Then read it again. Something broke open in him. Not a wound, a calling. He stood up, went to his closet, pulled out a coat, grabbed his keys, and walked out the door. David followed, confused. "Where are you going?" Jonathan looked back. "To do something that's not about me." They found Lydia 2 hours later at a small coffee shop on the south side. She looked surprised when they walked in. "Jonathan?" she asked. He smiled. "Can we sit?" She nodded quickly. "Of course." They sat in silence for a moment. "I didn't expect to hear from you," she said softly. "You did something brave," Jonathan replied. "You walked away from something comfortable. That matters." She looked down. "It doesn't feel brave. It feels scary." He nodded. "It usually does." She looked up. "Why are you here?" Jonathan paused, then said the words slowly. "Because I think this moment is bigger than a meal. Or a misunderstanding. I think people are hungry for something real. And I want to feed them." Lydia blinked. "Like, spiritually." "More than that." He took out his phone and showed her a note. It was a sketch, an idea, a plan, a community kitchen, faith-based, but inclusive. No reservations, no judgments. No one turned away. She stared at it. "You want to open a restaurant?" He nodded. "One table. For everyone." She laughed in disbelief. "You got kicked out of one restaurant and now you want to build your own?" Jonathan smiled. "Yeah, something like that." Back online, the world kept spinning. Some called him a victim. Others called him a provocateur. Pundits picked sides. Christians debated theology. Secularists debated intention. But somewhere in the noise, something quiet began. People started sending money. Not to Jonathan, to a fund Lydia had started for unemployed service workers. Within 24 hours, it had $20,000. Within 72 hours, it passed $150,000. Then a local church offered its empty fellowship hall for free. A retired chef donated equipment. Volunteers showed up from every borough of Chicago. And in the middle of it all was Jonathan, confused, humbled, exhausted, but finally, energized. He rolled up his sleeves, took out the trash, chopped onions, and served soup. By the end of the first week, the table was feeding 300 people a day. No sermons, no spotlights, just food and dignity. But the attention found him again. News crews, headlines, critics, and supporters. One day, while serving chili to an older man in a wheelchair, Jonathan felt a tap on his shoulder. It was Vincent, the manager. He looked different, tired, humbled. Jonathan stood straight. Their eyes locked. Vincent didn't speak at first. Just looked around. At the people, the tables, the laughter, the peace. Then he whispered, "I was wrong." Jonathan didn't flinch, just nodded. Vincent added, "I don't expect forgiveness." Jonathan replied, "Good, because that's not what this place is about." Vincent looked down. "I was scared," he said. "I thought, you being in my restaurant would offend people. Cost us business." Jonathan took a breath. "And," Vincent laughed dryly, "you being in that restaurant didn't cost me nearly as much as me kicking you out of it." Jonathan smiled sadly. "We all lose something when we give fear the mic." Then something happened Jonathan didn't expect. Vincent offered his hand. "Let me help," he said. "I know how to run a kitchen." Jonathan paused, then took the hand, and shook it. No cameras, no applause, just grace. The real kind. The kind that costs something. The kind that makes peace feel like fire. Back at the original restaurant, Marion's table sat nearly empty. Claudia stood at the bar, staring at the reservation list, blank. Vincent's words echoed in her head. "You being in that restaurant didn't cost me nearly as much as me kicking you out of it." She picked up the phone. Called her assistant. "Get me Jonathan Roumie's number," she said. "I need to talk to him." But he wouldn't answer. Not out of spite, out of purpose. Because he was no longer interested in defending his name. He was too busy feeding people who had none. Too busy showing a city, maybe a country, what love looked like when it put on an apron. The world was still loud, still cruel, still fractured, but in one corner of Chicago, something whole had begun. Word of the little community kitchen spread faster than anyone expected. Not just because of Jonathan Roumie, but because it was working. The table had started feeding not just the poor, not just the faithful, but anyone who walked through its doors. Construction workers sat beside former inmates. Teachers beside immigrants. A Catholic priest shared tea with a Muslim refugee. No one asked about belief. No one cared about titles. People just ate, and talked, and healed. But peace has a way of attracting fire. It started with whispers, social media posts from anonymous accounts, faith-based soup kitchen pushing propaganda. Is this really about feeding people, or converting them? Why is a Jesus actor using donations to build influence? A radio host picked up the story. Then a cable network. And just like that, the table became a political talking point. Not a place, not a community, a symbol. One side praised it, the other side attacked it. Jonathan hated every second of it. He wasn't a symbol, he was just a man trying to serve soup and stay sane. But they didn't care. Cameras started showing up outside. Protesters followed, and on a cold Tuesday morning, a city official walked in with a clipboard. She didn't smile. Mr. Roumie. Jonathan stepped forward, wiping his hands on a towel. Yes, we've received multiple complaints. Health code violations, fire safety concerns, unauthorized food distribution permits. Jonathan blinked. We've passed every inspection, twice. She shrugged. Doesn't matter. You're a headline now, which means you're a target. Jonathan felt the ground shift under him. Not fear, not panic, but that deep, aching sadness that comes when good is punished for being visible. Are you shutting us down? He asked quietly. She looked around at the people eating. Then back at him. No, not yet, but I'm giving you 48 hours to produce updated documentation. Licenses, fire exits, sanitation plans. He nodded slowly. Understood. As she turned to leave, she added, I hope this isn't political. But these days, everything is. He watched her go, then turned to David, who had just walked in with a box of donated bread. What was that about? David asked. Jonathan's voice was tired. Politics dressed as policy. David frowned. They're trying to shut us down. Jonathan didn't answer. He just walked back to the kitchen and started washing dishes. That night, he didn't sleep. He stared at the ceiling of his apartment, eyes wide open. Fingers twitching. He thought of Lydia, of Vincent, of every person who now needed this place. He couldn't lose it. Not now. So the next morning, he walked into City Hall. Alone, wearing the same coat he got kicked out in. He waited in a hallway for hours. And finally, got 10 minutes with the Deputy Commissioner of Public Health. The woman was sharp, stern, no nonsense. He laid out every document they had. She barely glanced at them. I've got dozens of kitchens in this city, she said. You think you're special because you've got some followers and a few prayers. Jonathan stared at her. I think I'm special, he said slowly, because I care what happens when people leave this building hungry. A pause. Her face didn't move, but something in her eyes did. You're not special, she said again. But you're rare, and that's worse. He furrowed his brow. Worse, because it means people like you make people like me look cold. He nodded slightly. Are you? Her jaw clenched. No, I'm just tired. Tired of people turning every kindness into a crusade. Every handout into a headline. Jonathan leaned forward. Then help me, quietly. Keep this place open. No press release. No interviews. Just grace. She exhaled sharply. Then stood. 3 weeks. Temporary clearance. But if anyone screws up, even once, I pull the plug. No questions asked. He stood too. Offered his hand. She hesitated. Then shook it. Do something good with this, she said. We already are, he replied. Back at the table, people were waiting. Nervous. Worried. Lydia met him at the door. Well, she asked. He smiled faintly. 3 weeks. She exhaled. I'll take it. The next few days were chaos. More volunteers. More inspections. More drama online. Someone threw a rock at the window one night. No one was hurt, but the message was clear. Not everyone wants you here. Jonathan swept the glass himself. Refused to close. Refused to harden. But the weight was building. One night, after closing, he was locking up when a man stepped out from the shadows. Tall, angry eyes. You Jonathan? Jonathan stiffened. Yes. You're the guy who thinks he's Jesus. He sighed. No, I'm the guy who plays him. The man stepped closer. You think just because you got kicked out of a restaurant, you're some kind of hero now? Jonathan didn't move. No, I'm just feeding people. You're dividing this city. Jonathan's voice dropped. By giving soup to strangers. You're a symbol, the man spat. And symbols attract enemies. Jonathan paused, then said quietly, so be it. The man didn't expect that. He stared at Jonathan for a long moment. Then turned and walked away. No threats, no violence, just warning. The next morning, the media descended again. A new article claimed Jonathan was using the kitchen to promote a political agenda. The headline read, "The Messiah Complex, when actors start preaching through soup." Jonathan didn't respond, didn't tweet, didn't rage, he just went back to work. But the fire was building. Until one night, a boy walked in, maybe 9 years old, alone, dirty, shivering. Jonathan knelt down. Where's your mom, buddy? The boy's lips trembled. Don't know. She told me to wait but never came back. Jonathan took his coat off immediately. Wrapped it around the child. Come sit. Let's get you warm. They sat. A volunteer brought soup. The boy ate like he hadn't in days. And Jonathan sat beside him the whole time. Didn't leave his side, not even once. Later, the boy fell asleep in a booth. Curled up like he belonged there. And something inside Jonathan cracked. He went outside, looked up at the stars. Then whispered, "Why me?" No answer, just wind. But maybe that was the answer. Because by morning, something changed. The story shifted, not because of a new post, but because of that picture. Someone had snapped a photo. Jonathan, asleep in the booth, arm around the child, coat half on him, soup still warm. No press, no hashtags, just love. It spread like wildfire, not outrage, but hope. People who never cared suddenly cared. And people who once criticized started to pray. Even some city officials called to help. The deputy commissioner returned, this time with supplies, food donations, and 2 new volunteers from her own office. I said 3 weeks, she smiled. Now I'm thinking, maybe longer. And just like that, the table was no longer in danger. It was alive, growing, unstoppable, not because of Jonathan Roumie, but because of everyone else who stood when it would have been easier to sit. Lydia, Vincent, David, the kid in the restaurant who first spoke up, the 12 who walked out, the waitress who quit, and all the people who realized, sometimes getting kicked out is the first step to inviting others in. Months passed. Winter faded into a shy, wet spring. The table was still standing. Not just as a building, but as an idea. People came now not just for meals, but for meaning. The booths weren't labeled by wealth, or race, or politics. Just names. First names. Jessica, Malik, Maria, Abe. Sometimes, those names became prayers. Sometimes, those prayers became friendships. And sometimes, those friendships became family. Jonathan stayed quiet about it all. He didn't give interviews. He didn't post selfies. He just showed up. Day after day, apron tied, sleeves rolled, head bowed. One Thursday morning, as sunlight poured through the tall church windows that now served as the dining room, Lydia walked over to Jonathan with a piece of mail. No return address, she said. He took it, opened it slowly. Inside was a check, for $100,000. No note, no explanation, just a line written on the memo. For the ones who stayed at the table. Jonathan stared at it in disbelief. David looked over his shoulder. Someone believes in this. Jonathan nodded slowly. A lot of someones. That day, he didn't make a speech. Didn't post about the donation. He used it to repair the plumbing. Install heaters. Upgrade the ovens. And when people asked where the money came from, he just said, "Someone who understands the value of staying." Weeks later, Claudia, the owner of Marion's Table, walked in. Not with a lawyer. Not with PR staff. Alone, she waited quietly in line. Wore a simple black coat. No makeup. When she reached the counter, Jonathan looked up, and paused. She gave a small, respectful nod. "I'm not here for drama," she said. "I didn't think you were," he replied. "I'm here, because I needed to see what you built. What we almost destroyed." Jonathan gestured to a seat. "You're welcome to stay. We've got stew today." She sat. A volunteer brought her a bowl. She took a slow bite. Then exhaled. "You know," she said, "we opened Marion's Table to be a place of peace. And somewhere along the way, we forgot that peace doesn't mean silence." Jonathan listened. She continued. "Peace is messy. It's uncomfortable. It costs something. You reminded me of that. Jonathan smiled gently. We're all still learning. Claudia looked around the room. It's beautiful here, not because of the place, but the people, the conversations, the honesty. He nodded. That's the only currency that never loses value. She paused, then said, we're reopening. But with changes. No more fear-based policies. No more turning people away because they make us think. He was quiet for a moment. Then said, that's redemption. Claudia stood, offered her hand. Thank you for not hating us. Jonathan shook it. I think we've all had enough hate. That night, after closing, Jonathan sat alone at one of the booths. The same booth where the little boy had once fallen asleep in his coat. He looked around at the empty chairs. Crumbs on tables. Soup stains on napkins. The quiet hum of something sacred. David sat across from him. You look tired, he said. I am, but you're staying. Jonathan nodded. I think I was always meant to stay. David smiled. Even after getting kicked out of the first table. Jonathan chuckled. Maybe especially because of that. They sat in silence for a while. Until David asked softly, what do you think this really is, man? A soup kitchen? A protest? A parable? Jonathan looked up at the stained glass window. The light spilling down like gold. And said, I think it's a second chance. For all of us. A week later, a letter came in the mail. It was from the boy's mother. The one who'd vanished. It read, my name is Shayla. I left my son that night because I was scared. Of myself. Of what I'd become. I was high. I wasn't supposed to be. I was clean for months, but I relapsed. I thought I didn't deserve him. I thought someone better would find him. But instead, you did. You fed him, sat with him, stayed with him. You made a stranger feel loved when I couldn't even love myself. He's back with me now. I'm clean again, one day at a time. And every night when I tuck him in, he tells me, Jesus gave me soup. Thank you for giving us back to each other. Jonathan folded the letter slowly, pressed it to his heart, and wept, not because he was broken, but because something in the world had been put back together. Maybe not perfectly, but beautifully. A month later, a reporter from a national magazine requested an interview. They wanted to do a feature on the table. Jonathan declined, but he offered them lunch. The reporter came, ate stew beside a retired bus driver and a teenage foster kid. She left crying, wrote the article anyway. The headline read, he got kicked out of a restaurant. Now he's feeding a city. But the best line was buried at the end. It said, this isn't about one man. This is about what happens when people choose to stay at the table, when it would be easier to walk away. Today, the table still stands. No chain locations, no branding, just an open door, a hot meal, and a chair for whoever needs it. Because Jonathan Roumie was never trying to start a movement. He was trying to follow a calling. And sometimes, that calling starts with a whisper. And ends with a meal. He still doesn't talk much about what happened at Marion's table. But every now and then, someone will recognize him on the street and say, hey, aren't you that guy who got kicked out? And he'll smile softly, shrug, and reply, no, I'm the guy who stayed.